Welcome back to JavaScript The Basics. In this lesson, we're going to look at object constructor functions. Object constructor functions allow us to create many objects using a function as a template. We'll cover functions in a future section. A function for now is something we can count on to do work for us. So in this lesson, we're going to learn what the object constructor function does for us. So let's say we want to make a car, then another car, and then another car. This could take a long time. In our previous example, we have only been able to build one object, aka a car, at a time. Sometimes in JavaScript, we like to have an object type that can be used to create many objects of one type. The standard way to create an object type is to use an object constructor function. So let's pretend we are a car factory and have to build a lot of cars. We will first create the template with the object's properties. This will save us from writing a lot of the same code over and over again. We'll look at functions in a later lecture, but when you find yourself repeating the same code over and over, that is a sign there is probably a function that can do the work for us. Let's look at this code since it is new to us. Then we'll look at the magic it performs. First, we have the JavaScript reserved keyword function. This is for our JavaScript interpreter, so it knows what to do with the code we are giving it. After this, we have the function name car. It is capitalized. I know that I told you before that capitalizing the first word of variables is not the best practice. But when it comes to object constructor notation, this is in fact best practice. This isn't necessary, but remember, we are always coding for the JavaScript interpreter's understanding, but also for human eyes that will look at our code later. The function has three parameters. Each one sets the value of a property in the object. The properties will be the same for each object created using this function. We have a new word for our JavaScript vocabulary. It is the reserved word this. Let's pause for a moment and talk about this. The keyword this is commonly used inside functions and objects. Where the function is declared alters what this means. It always refers to one object, usually the object in which the function operates. In JavaScript, the thing called this is the object that owns the JavaScript code. The value of this, when used in a function, is the object, in this case car, that owns the function. The this keyword in an object constructor does not have a value. It is only a substitute for the new object. The value of this will become the new object when the constructor is used to create an object. Note that this is not a variable, it is a keyword. You cannot change the value of this to be something else and get the same result. Let's produce a mass amount of cars. The function car is an object constructor. Once you have an object constructor, you can create new objects or instances of the same type. We can do that by setting a new variable of car1 and assign it a value of new car. And remember, car doesn't have to be capitalized, but it is the convention and best practice in this case. You then give it arguments. Remember, the car object constructor has the parameters built into it. And this is where you are calling the function, so we put in arguments. We can then fill our car with arguments that match the parameters of our object constructor. We add Honda for make, Civic for model, and 2006 for year. And here's what our value for car1 is. That's a lot of code. Look how easy it is to make a bunch of cars using the object constructor function. Once we have created our new objects, we can add and access them in the same way as any other object. We could look at car 4, the Jeep Cherokee, and we might want to add a few features. We could give it four-wheel drive with dot notation. Car4 dot four-wheel drive equals the boolean true. We could give it a boolean as to whether it has bumper stickers or not, and in this case we could use bracket notation to do this. There you go. You have moved from making cars one at a time to becoming a car factory. Now let's give this a shot again. Let's build a zoo. If we were to build a zoo with object literal notation, it might look something like this. By the way, I'm not a zoologist, so I'm just making this stuff up off the top of my head. First, let's add a lion. We'll give it the name Simba. I know, not very original. We'll give it a food type of carnivore and a boolean of true for king of the jungle. Then we could add a monkey. We'll give him a first name of Louis, a food type of carnivore, and a boolean for false in regards to being king of the jungle. As you can see, this is going to take a while and a lot of repeated keystrokes to fill up our zoo. So let's create another object constructor function. It looks like all of our animals are going to have a name, food type, and status as to whether they are king of the jungle. We'll start off by declaring a function and choosing the function name, in this case animal. Again, we capitalize it as best practice. We then fill in the parameters, which are name, food type, and king of the jungle. Then we have opening and closing curly braces for our function code. And there we place our this keyword that will be referring to the object animal. And there we place our this keyword that will be referring to the object constructor function. Attached to each keyword is the property that will belong to each instance of the object, and then we set the value equal to the parameter above that will be filled in with the argument when we invoke the function. So we are all set. Let's fill up our zoo. We'll just declare a new variable for each animal and assign it the value of the new keyword that is going to let the JavaScript interpreter know that we're going to make new instances of our object. Then we just fill in the parameters and we are all set. And there you have it. Thanks for joining me in our first look at object constructor functions. We'll see you in the lab to put what we have learned into practice. Alright, welcome to our lab. In our previous lesson, we looked at object constructor notation. We saw that through the use of a function, we can create a lot of objects really fast. We also learned that if we are having to repeat the same code over and over again, there is probably a function that can help us out. Constructors are just regular functions which are used with the new keyword. They come in handy when we need to make multiple similar objects with the same properties and methods. In this lab, we're going to build object constructor functions. We're going to build a house constructor function and a book constructor function. We'll start out by building object literals as we did during our first lesson on objects. From there, you're going to turn that object literal into an object constructor. Let's go ahead and build a home together. So we've declared a variable called home, rooms with the number 4, apartment with the boolean false, color with the string brown, swimming pool with the boolean true, state with the string of Washington, city with the string of Seattle. Now we have one home. To do another home with object literal, we have to type all of this in again. We have var home2, rooms, the number 2, apartment, the boolean true, color, the string white, swimming pool, the boolean false, state, the string California, and city, the string Sacramento. It took the same amount of time with a lot of repeated code. Let's imagine that we are a home developer and we have acres of land to fill with houses. This is going to take a while if I'm building each house by hand. But what if I could just build the blueprints and then hand off that work to a construction crew? It's not a perfect analogy, but close to what an object constructor function does. Let's build our blueprint. We have named our function home, and we have capitalized the H. Again, we don't have to do this, but to be human readable, it's best practice and expected. We then put in the parameters. These are going to be the parts of our house. They are what we will fill with arguments when our work crew starts to implement our blueprints calling a function. We then have the this keyword, which is doing some magic. It is essentially creating an empty object that we can then fill with these different properties of rooms, apartment, color, swimming pool, state, and city. They are then assigned to our parameters, which will later be filled out with our arguments. Now, let's build a ton of homes. Each of our home building crews takes this as their blueprint. They name their homes by declaring a variable. They assign it the value of the new keyword. The new keyword is for the JavaScript interpreter to instantiate a new object. We then name the object constructor function name, in this case home, which is now case sensitive to how we defined it earlier. Best practice again, keep it capitalized. We now fill in the arguments for our object constructor function. Rooms 3, apartment false, color, the string blue, swimming pool, the boolean false, city Atlanta, and state Georgia. One line of code. Pretty fast. Okay, here is your challenge. I want you to build 3 more homes with your object constructor function. Go ahead and pause the video, grab your tools, and build some homes. Then we'll come together in a few moments and build some more. Alright, how'd it go? Let's build our houses. We are just going to declare 3 variables, followed by the new keyword creating new instances of the object constructor home, and then we're going to fill in our arguments. We're on to our new challenge. I want you to do the same with a book and a library. I first want you to build a book object of any book with an object literal. I then want you to imagine that you are filling a library with books, and you want to do that in a shorter amount of time and less code. So you're going to have to create an object constructor function. I then want you to populate the library by creating 5 more instances. This should take you a few minutes. You might want to watch the example we just did if you aren't sure where to start. Go ahead and pause the video, and in a few moments we'll come up with a possible solution. Alright, how did it go? Hopefully it was a bit of a challenge, but still manageable for you. Let's start by building a book object with object literal notation. Let's just give it 2 properties for the sake of brevity, author and title. Actually, let's make it 3 and add pages. First, we'll declare the variable book. Our author will be Victor Hugo, the title is Les Mis, and the pages, I don't know off the top of my head, I know it's huge, and I started it and couldn't finish, so we'll say 1200 pages. Now, let's go ahead and build the object constructor function based off of this. We're going to use the keyword function, followed by capital book, followed by our parameters of author, title, and pages. Then we have our code block with the keyword this, connecting to the book object and the properties of author, title, and pages, and setting them equal to the parameter values, later to be filled in with the arguments. Alright, we are almost done. Let's create 3 new instances of our book object constructor function. We just declare our variable and then assign it the value of the new keyword, which will make new instances of our book. And then we fill in our arguments as we call or invoke the function. Now, when we enter these variables into our console, we get the objects we were looking for. There you have it. Thanks for joining me in this first look at object constructor functions, and we'll see you in the next lesson.